Welcome to Corporate Therapy, the podcast where we unpack the dumb stuff businesses do. We ask the big juicy questions like why, what were they thinking, and then chase down the answers. I'm Matt, your corporate plumber.
And I'm Rob, your leadership locksmith.
So today we're tackling something that hits a little too close to home, people pleasing. And whilst that might supercharge your early career, it's going to most likely hit you like a train later on. Most importantly, we're going to see, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? And hopefully that's not the train. But Rob, this one's a little awkward for me to talk on. I'm not quite sure even where to start on this.
Yeah, it's a tough one, Matt. I think, we both have a little bit of personal experience with this, certainly earlier in our careers. And I think most middle managers do, because people pleasing is something that sort of happens almost naturally at the start of a career. You want to do a good job. You want to please the people around you. You want to please your team. You want to please your boss. Problem is, it becomes a little like a drug. It's great at the start, and after a while, you're hooked, and bad things start to happen. So I think, yeah, this one's going to be tough, but we'll see what we can do with it.
So people pleasing is like career cocaine. Brilliant. Yeah. Okay in small doses at just the right time. Yeah, it's funny because this topic actually came about because otherwise I would have avoided it like the plague, is because we were chatting with a potential client of ours. We've worked with them before in the past in a different circumstance, and they were describing their culture and said, hey, we've got a bunch of people pleasers here. Probed, okay, lights popping on. What do you mean by people pleasing? Well, everyone really had a caring culture. Everyone's keen to do the right thing, but they don't want to rock the boat. Like, nobody has any of the hard conversations. Yeah. No one provides any feedback with any substance behind it. And as a result, they kind of have a mediocre performing team, and they know they can do a heck of a lot more. Probably at that point, I didn't want to put my hand up and say, well, I so know people pleasing well, and I'm still trying to recover from it. So I'm really keen to get to the bottom of, like, what is it that people pleasing is? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? When does it show up? And I think the one I'm most keen, Rob, to tackle today is around, it doesn't just screw you over, it screws over your teams, the people you actually do really care about. And if you want to be a leader that really is successful, not just for you, but for your team, then we're going to need to look at how do we find some intervention on the people pleasing side of things.
Sure.
But how do you know if you're a people pleaser, Rob? Like, what are some of those kind of clues that you should look for? How do you sense they're a people pleaser?
It's interesting. To me, it's much easier to see from the outside looking in than it is when you're knee deep in it yourself. When you're knee deep in it yourself, I don't know if this is what your experience is like, but my experience with it was, I just want to get the best result for them. Was what I was telling myself. I want to let them know that I'm a good worker and that I'm eligible for promotion and all of this sort of stuff. I want to be seen as a valued member of the team. But the interesting thing for me about that is that, my sister's a psychologist. We have Sarah on the corporate therapy community, who's an organizational psychologist, Amber, who's a neuroscientist. Most of those folks will tell you that people's motivation comes from one of two places. It's either a fear motivator or it's a love motivator, and everything else is basically just shades of gray between those. When you're knee deep in people pleasing, you would consider it a love motivator. I just want to do what's best for them. I want to do what's best for my team. If you look at it from a self-compassion perspective, I want to be recognized for the good work that I do. But if you think about it, and this is why I say it's much easier to see from the outside looking in, it's actually a fear motivator. Right? Yeah. It's the fear of not being seen as somebody who does good work. It's the fear of being the person who rocks the boat and what that might mean for you. So for me, anytime I've found a fear motivator to be more prevalent, the things that it makes you do to try to avoid a certain circumstance are more likely to bring that circumstance into play. It's a survival reaction that doesn't really work for us anymore. You end up in a position where you're saying things, saying yes to things that you shouldn't say yes to, that you're smiling despite the fact that you're burning out, that you're making decisions just about keeping the peace. And to me, that's all massively detrimental to you. And if you're a leader of people, it's massively detrimental to your team as well, because you've got people focused on the wrong stuff. How and I realize this might cut close to the bone, but how did you recognize that you were a people pleaser?
I think we should cut to a pee break at this point in time before we can get it, and we can get it in the post. People pleasing for me was brilliant early on in the career. It absolutely got me promoted because you were brilliant at capturing briefs. Like, you were so keen to hear what they had to say. You were shocking, though, at keep signing longer and longer briefs, though, because you were throwing in, yes, I can do that. Yep, we can make that happen. Like, the word no just didn't enter the vocabulary early on. And so this was like an out-of-body experience where you could kind of hear yourself saying yes, and inside you are literally screaming, hell no, what are you doing, you absolute moron at this point. Like, it's like slows down time, like being something out of the Matrix. And and you walk away from those sessions going, what an absolute idiot. Not them, you. Like, and you're so frustrated at yourself. And that frustration, though, builds. You know, you start doing the work that you've just said yes to. You start eating badly. You start, throwing yourself into, because you've overcommitted. And then resentment starts to really kick in. And that's the dangerous part, or that's the tipping point, because normally then you're blaming others. It's coming to the point, as opposed to you were the one that said yes. And it's always, you're leaving yourself to last before you're going to even consider blaming yourself. And that resentment often will pop out in either passive aggressive ways, or it pops out in really unhealthy environments where you burnt yourself to a crisp. And so you're now starting to make really shitty decisions because you're so damn tired. Yeah. So for me, the showing up like that took me a long time to realize those aren't the kind of behaviors that are going to get the best out of you or the best out of your team. And I had some really courageous team members that helped out in that space, who showed enough care to kind of help manage upwards. I'm forever grateful for that. When it comes to the breaking points of like how it breaks you, is like, I'm keen to see, you've talked there, Rob, you see it, it's easy to see it from outside in. What does that look like for you?
I get nervous when people describe their culture as, we're very caring, we're a family here, we all love each other, that kind of thing. Because that often tells me that what we've got is a bunch of people pleasers. And when you've got a bunch of people pleasers, what you're really telling me is you don't have people that have been given a safe enough environment or the courage to tackle the status quo, to make the controversial calls, to challenge the highest paid person in the room, that sort of stuff. And what happens in that is that you end up with a whole heap of groupthink in an organization. There's the classic example of the space shuttle disaster, where I think there were 17 people at NASA who were fairly sure that thing was never going to make it to orbit in 1987, but they said nothing because they had a culture of nice. Groupthink kills astronauts, right? But it also kills organizations because we're not tackling the things that we know should be tackled because we're trying to be nice. We're trying to be a people pleaser. The other thing is that, we're most of us at least are quite logical, quite reasonable creatures. And we have a fair idea what needs to be done in an organization. So if you see your boss going yes to something that is crazy, you're like, oh man, why are we doing that? It's only because the CEO asked him to do it, or something along those lines. So they end up in almost a state of confusion, your team, where they're like, I don't understand the decisions they're making, aside from the fact that they're just sucking up to the big guys, or angling for their next promotion or whatever it is. So, you mentioned the resentment that comes when you're a people pleaser yourself. You often see it in teams. I had a boss at one point who advised me on how to deal with his boss, the HR director. Yeah. And he said, he's really easy to deal with. You just have to learn which buttons to push, Yeah. If you tell him, he had this thing where L&D shouldn't have been a cost center. It should be a profit center. And we were working with a registered training organization at the time. And for every trainee that we got through a Cert 3 or a Cert 4, we got a payment from the government.
Yep.
And his take on it was, well, you know, we should be spending our L&D budget on doing stuff that gets us payments from the government so that we can make L&D a profit center, you know. So if you wanted him to agree to something, all you had to do was tell him how you were saving money or how you were getting money in the door, right? That was it. He didn't care where it was coming from. You could be out selling boosted cars for all he cared, you know. As long as the money was coming in, he was good with it. But he wasn't effective, and he wasn't doing the right stuff. So I said to my boss, I was like, you know, I get what you mean. Pushing this guy's buttons is the way to get him on side. But why would you want him on side? He's making terrible decisions, you know? And my boss at the time was obviously a people pleaser. And he was like, well, that's just the way you've got to do it around here. You know, you got to keep him happy. If you don't keep him happy, nothing else gets done. And I got that, but I didn't really get it at the same time, you know?
Do you ever feel there's a time, though, where people-pleasing is healthy? It's a good thing?
Yeah, absolutely. At the start of your career, at the early points in your career, yeah, I think there's a mutual benefit to people-pleasing. When you've got a new boss who doesn't know you all that well, if you're lucky like I was, right at the very start of my career, my very first learning and development gig, I had a boss, Nisha Blake. I still love her to death. Nisha basically took a chance on me. I had no formal training experience, anything like that. And she was like, let's give it a shot. We'll try it for 3 months. We'll see how it goes. And, you know, I'll coach you and help you along the way. I wanted Nisha to like me. I needed Nisha to like me, right? Because the shot she had given me was one that didn't come around all that often in anybody's career. You know, it's rare to have somebody who'll take a chance on you when you're unproven, right? So I needed her to like me. I needed to be able to suck her brain dry. I needed to get every coaching and feedback opportunity that I could from her. And the best way for me to do that was to please her. Yeah. So I went out of my way to do the best work that I could. I went out of my way to have every possible feedback and coaching conversation that I could with her. I went out of my way to have every possible social engagement that I could with her. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way. You know, I loved hanging out with Nisha, but we hung out every Friday night. We were the last people in the bar, you know, and in that we built a relationship that worked well for both of us, right? Because with her mentoring, with her coaching, with her feedback, I became a pretty good facilitator, a pretty good trainer. Yeah. And she was getting the best work out of me, and we were both enjoying each other's company. There's no downside to that.
So I think that beautifully illustrates when people pleasing can be healthy. I think when it starts, you touched on it earlier, where fear really starts to kick in. If that's the primary motivator behind your people pleasing, I think that's when it goes off the rails. And I'm absolutely no psychologist, but it was really interesting to actually take a little bit of a look as to where did this come about. And I was trying to get a feel for it, because whilst it talked a lot about the individuals, their childhood, and some of the shitty parenting that led to some of the negative behaviors that you actually end up seeing pop up later on in life, there were some other areas, though, where it wasn't just about the childhood. One of the areas that was really uncomfortable to read was when you talked about crappy gender norms, right? Where it was some of the interesting statistics where it said we're much more likely to view men who were assertive as fantastic leaders, but when it came to women, they were seen as bossy and unlikable. And to me, this was troubling to hear this, because if we actually want to get a diverse teams that are coming as part of this, then we need to look at how do we actually look at the role models we want both men and women to be, and what does assertive leadership look like? There's a fantastic talk by Robin House, a TED talk. We've got the links to that in the community, where she really talks about how she was being pigeonholed not in a good way, simply because she wasn't prepared to pay the people-pleasing game. What's your take on that, Rob?
So there's a couple of things here. The unhealthy childhood conditioning, if you like, into being a people pleaser is one that I find really interesting. And the reason I find it interesting is something we were chatting about on the community yesterday. The idea of these little inner voices that you have. Now I was lucky in that my parents didn't set me up to be a people pleaser. But I did struggle a lot with my inner voices. I got to a point where basically any time I heard the voice inside my head, it was telling me that I sucked. I sucked always. It was always all my fault. It was a real negative spiral, and it took me a while to get out of it, and a little bit of therapy. But what was interesting as I was exploring that, and I explored it with the help of an awesome therapist, but also with the help of Martin Seligman's book, Learned Optimism. He talks about this explanatory style where the voices in your head speak in a number of different ways to you. They are permanent, they are pervasive, and they're personal. So permanent, you always suck. Pervasive, you suck at everything. And personal, you suck. It's not anybody else. It's you. And what Seligman teaches you to do is have a little argument with the voices in your head. Yeah. When they talk to you permanently, you always suck. You respond with something temporary. No, I sucked last Thursday, and I've learned from that, and I've moved on. And so on. You learn to have a little argument with them, and the reason you learn to have a little argument with them is that those inner voices started as outer voices. They weren't always in your head. That was somebody else, and this came into sharp relief for me when I bought my first new car. It should have been an exciting time for me. I had just bought this sporty little hot hatchback, a little Ford Focus XR5. I was delighted with myself, even had the racing stripes over the top.
Awesome.
And I should have been delighted with myself. I was picking up a brand new car from the dealership, the first new car I'd ever owned. And as I got into it, the voice in my head went, a secondhand car would have done you fine. And I was like, oh, hang on a second. That's not my voice. That's my dad's voice, right? My dad never bought a new car in his life. He had second-hand cars the whole time. And he always was a little thrifty, a little frugal, and he would have thought that buying a brand new car was a damnable extravagance, So we need to realize that those little voices in your head often come from the unhealthy childhood conditioning that you got. But if I can tell you anything from personal experience, it's that with the help of Martin Seligman's Learned Optimism and perhaps a therapy session or two, you can rewire your head, right? You can turn those inner voices from your biggest critics into your biggest cheerleaders. Once you start to learn to respond to them appropriately, they realize that if they want a voice at all, it has to be a positive one. That has probably had the biggest impact on my sense of optimism. So you can turn that early childhood conditioning off. On the crappy gender norms, I mean, I've seen this in sharp relief recently. I had a friend and his family come to visit us up here in Mudgee. And they have a 3-year-old daughter who has me wrapped around her little finger. She's incredible, And at one point, she was basically barking orders, shouting for what she wanted, And her mum went, "Oh, you're so bossy." And I said, I joked and went, "She's displaying leadership skills," But and we were having a little laugh about it. But there's actually a kind of sinister undertone to that, which is that we do refer to little girls as bossy. And we do refer to little boys as having leadership skills, and that's not cool. We really need to turn that off. Now, I mean, it's a bigger problem that I can solve. I'm not even sure where to start on that. But we need to check our language, because that can make a difference. I mean, I would think in this particular case, she's probably too young to even realize that she's being called bossy and that there's a problem with that. But that won't always be the case. When she hits her teenage years, stuff like that'll stick. And that's something we need to rectify.
Do you think, though, one, we've talked about childhood, we've talked about genders, but What about whole industries which are kind of hardwired to pleasing others that are going through? So I'm talking about hospitality in particular. Like people pleasing kind of comes with the job. Kind of curious to get your take on that.
I always remember the story about when Apple, if you're as old as we are, and I know most people aren't, but you'll remember when Apple used to be just a computer manufacturer. And I heard a great story about when they decided they wanted to open the retail stores. They asked themselves, who's the best at customer experience? And they decided upon the Ritz Carlton. So they took a few folks from Apple and they had them live at the Ritz Carlton for 2 weeks. It's good work if you can get it. But they were there to try to find out how the Ritz Carlton does what it does so well. And what they found was that anytime there was any sort of complaint, anything that needed to be rectified, not only did the Ritz Carlton solve the problem, but they also fixed the relationship with the customer. So they weren't assuming that solving the problem would be enough to fix the relationship with the customer. There were two separate parts to the engagement. And that's where, it's why when you walk into an Apple store and you go up to the Genius Bar and you hand them over your broken iPad, they give you back a fixed iPad, but they also fix the relationship with you, between you and Apple. And they do that in an interesting way. Now, I don't think it's entirely people pleasing. I think there are a lot of industries that are built around what superficially looks like people pleasing. But if you actually see a people pleasing organization, what you'll notice is most of their, well, not most, that's a gross generalization, but some of their customers will realize that and take them for a ride because of it. I heard a story about an insurance company where a person didn't have insurance on their house. Yeah. And the roof got blown off it. Yeah. They had canceled their insurance a month before and the insurance company paid out anyway. And I was like, why would you do that? Oh, well, because, there was media risk if we didn't. So this person had basically said, I'm going to go to a current affair if you don't pay me. And they thought, well, it's better to pay them out than to go to a current affair. Now that's a people-pleasing organization, one that I never expected to see in insurance. But the customers had worked it out so well that they were taking those organizations for a ride. Now, if I had been in that organization, I think the principle of that would have stopped me from making that decision.
But building on that, when you think about individual relationships between the people pleaser and those that's demanding or those that's asking for help to happen. What I'm curious of is when the relationship does shift, when you start putting boundaries in place, is how that relationship suddenly can be impacted. Do you have any examples, Rob, where you've seen that take place? Like when you yourself said, okay, I need to start moving on from the people-pleasing phase in my career. Yeah. How did that impact your relationships with others?
So I was hugely lucky, Matt, in that, again, I had an awesome boss who gave me some wonderful words of wisdom. What he said to me was, you need to learn to say no by saying yes. And I went, huh? He said, when you're dealing with execs, he said, have you noticed the way I have a really good relationship with all the execs? And I said, yeah. And he goes, that's because I've never said no to them. And I went, oh, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. That sounds like you would be loaded up with so much work you wouldn't know what to do with it, Yeah. And he goes, no. He says, it's not that. He goes, I say yes. And then I tell them the consequences of that yes. And I went, okay. So he gave me an example. He said, if the CEO comes to me and says, can you build me a rocket to the moon? I'll go, sure, no problem. However, I'm going to need about 100,000 staff. I'm going to need about 10 years and about a $400 billion budget. But there's these guys, NASA over here. They've been doing it since 1959. Maybe we should give them a call. And of course, the exec goes and calls NASA. Yeah. So the example I thought was interesting because it allowed you to maintain the benefits of being a people pleaser, i.e. having a good relationship with the people around you without the downside of getting loaded up with a whole heap of crappy work, So that was the sort of approach that I took, and it worked pretty well for me. However, there have been situations where that's just impossible, where something is happening that you are so opposed to that you have to say no, or you have to at least come up with a good, reasonable argument as to why. And there are times that's worked beautifully for me. There have been times where I've tackled senior leaders and off the back of it got a wonderful result. There have also been times where I've tackled senior leaders and got made redundant, but even that was a good result, because this was something that I was massively passionate about. It was something that I knew was the right call for the organization. And I knew that the reasons they weren't doing it were all political and personal power based. So it made sense for me to be made redundant from that. You've as far as I'm concerned, if you can say no by saying yes, give a person a yes, and the consequences of it, by all means do it. I think that's often the ideal scenario. But if you're switching from being a people pleaser to somebody who is occasionally up for rocking the boat, you've got to be prepared to get wet from time to time,
But what about if you deeply care about the relationships you've either got with your colleagues or your teams at that point, and you're trying to find a way to start to put in boundaries, one step at a time? Where do you even start with that without, putting those relationships at risk?
In our last podcast, we spoke about feedback and the superpower that can be. That's where I would start. Is if I deeply care about my colleagues, if I deeply care about my team, even if I go as far as deeply caring about the organization, and I need behavioral change, feedback's the way to get it. If I can use that BICA model, I observe this behavior and the impact on the people around you is this, and the consequence for you is this. So the action I'd like you to take next time is this. And if that's delivered with the right motivation, I care about you enough to want to see you succeed, the chances of that failing are pretty slim in my experience. And I think it's a good way to start behavioral change happening. The other thing is that sometimes, if you have been a people pleaser in the past, you may find that that's sort of seeped into your team as well. So when you're changing that behavior in yourself, you may need to change it in them too.
Oh, nice pickup there. I think one of the other behaviours that I observe a lot with people pleasers, see it myself, is the word sorry.
Oh, yeah.
It's the ability to say sorry on speed dial.
Yeah.
Any tips there on how to get away from I'm sorry, even for crap that you don't own? Never started, never lit that fire, but somehow you're still apologising for it.
Yeah. Firstly, don't be Canadian. they say sorry all the time. No, in all seriousness, sorry is something also that I've struggled to turn off, to the point that my wife occasionally tells me that I've used up my quota of sorries for the day. So what I think is interesting in that is that when you're saying sorry, it's usually because something's gone wrong.
Yep.
I had another awesome boss who used to say to me, some days you win, some days you learn. So what I've tried to do is condition myself to, anytime I'm about to say sorry, I'll go, what can we learn from that? If something went wrong, which it usually does when you're about to say sorry, what can I learn from that? Something's gone wrong. What can I learn from that if I'm there solo? What can we learn from that if we're there as a team?
But what that sounds so beautifully simple and easy to do.
Oh, yeah.
How do you catch yourself in that moment? Because the word is so ingrained. It's like a muscle memory of, hey, sorry. How do you find a break or a?
So how I did it was I asked people to call me out on it.
Okay.
I said, I have this tendency to say sorry when I shouldn't say sorry. I want you to observe it for me. It's kind of like, when you're going to the gym. I didn't go to the gym this morning, which makes 16 years in a row now. But when you're going to the gym, you're much more likely to stay going to the gym if you've got a mate of yours going to the gym with you.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go, hey, the Duna's got a grip and I really don't want to get out of bed. But when you're letting down your mate who's waiting for you at the gym, that's a different story. Yeah. So I think that you're almost using the power of peer pressure for benefit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if we were colleagues, I would come to you or even if you were in my team and reported to me, I would come to you and go, hey, here's a behavior I'm trying to change. Yeah. I've noticed that I say sorry a lot, even when it's not my fault, when it's not my responsibility. Can you keep an eye out for me and call me out when I do it? And then when they call you out, which they will, give somebody permission to criticize you, they'll go hell for leather at it, when they call you out on it, that's the point where you go, okay, so what can we learn from that rather than the sorry? And that starts the what can we learn becoming the muscle memory rather than the sorry, if that makes sense.
I really appreciate you sharing your stories on how to, or advice on how to solve for sorry. The one topic, though, that I've been trying to avoid for the last 30-odd minutes has been around self-validation, right?
Right.
It's around, I'm going to let others determine my worth at this point. What they say is and how they respond is going to very much determine if I feel good about myself. And so what ends up happening is you're watching their face, their body language like a hawk, because you're trying to read any of the micro expressions. Are we hitting the right points? Are we hitting the right marks here or not? And that's exhausting. It is stressful as hell. Do you have any advice for folks who are trying to encourage self-validation? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I'm not sure how valuable they are, but I do.
Well, let's give it a crack then.
So, it's important to realize that there's a vicious cycle here in that when you please somebody and you get praise because of it, even if that praise is just a smile that you're noticing them because of something you just said, you get a dopamine hit, right? And I mean, dopamine is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best and most dangerous drugs at the same time, because you don't need to go to a dealer to buy it. It's in there. Yeah. So we've got instant access to it, presuming we approach it in the right way. But the danger is that you get into a cycle. You get the dopamine hit and you go, I need that again. I need it again. I need it again. I need it again. So you get into this spiral of seeking praise being your number one priority. Yeah. Switching from an extrinsic motivator like that to an intrinsic motivator where I'm doing this because I'm really proud of the work that I'm doing, or I'm doing this because this is really meaningful to me, or I'm really proud of myself. That's a hugely difficult jump to make. Yeah. You see that certainly in a lot of Western cultures in how horrifically uncomfortable people are with compliments. You know, if I give you a compliment, and I know this because I've done it many times, you will find 101 different ways to turn it back onto me. And I've done the same with you. I don't mean that as any criticism. It's the sort of culture that we have. So somebody said to me once, the next time you get a compliment, see if you can come up with a genuine thank you. And I was like, oh, okay. And now again, this is a habit forming thing. Yeah. But if you can come up with a genuine thank you when somebody delivers a compliment, your self-worth starts to increase a little bit. Yeah. Also, I'm going to go back to that book that changed my life, Martin Seligman's Learned Optimism. Yeah. Because you're dealing with the voices in your own head, they, and like I said, they if you shut down the negative explanatory style that Seligman talks about, you replace it with a positive one. It takes time, and it takes habit. I used to carry around a little notebook with me, and I remember writing down stuff that the voices in my head were saying, so that I knew, oh, okay, that sounds like it's permanent, so I need to respond to it in a temporary way, and I would write down my response. It took habit to turn it off. Now, this was a long time ago. If it was now, I would just be putting notes into my phone. But you get where I'm coming from. It takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of habit. But when those voices realize that if I want to have a voice here, it needs to be a positive one, they start becoming cheerleaders. You get to a point where you'll do something and the voice in your head will go, nailed it. And it's almost like it comes from an external source, but they go, nailed it. And you kind of smile and without even thinking about it, go, I've just got validation from my own head. This is kind of scary. I remember my sister telling me that she said that the brain is the most important organ in the body. But remember which organ is telling you that.
Your sister sounds like a smart lady. You need to get her on the podcast, I reckon.
I'll have to at some point, yeah.
I think the bit you touch on there, Rob, this is not about big shifts. This is about small habits on a consistent basis. Yeah. And that sounds a little bit less threatening, still scary, but not breaking the bank. And I think, the ability to just jot down, what did I do today that I'm actually pretty proud of, or that worked. You don't need to show anyone. That can be just yours. The ability to practice saying no in safe environments. Sorry, no, Dave, I can't make drinks this Friday. Yeah. And I'm talking about a no without a whole explanation as to why you're saying no at that point. Just a straight no. Or for me, the sorry's one is, I reckon I could win that for the Olympics. It is still a bloody annoying one that I am very keen to tackle. So if there's any listeners out there with advice on how not to become a sorry addict, that would be brilliant. All up for that. Any other final advice you'd love to give for folks around people pleasing and what they can do to really break the cycle?
I think I'd just like to reiterate something that you said there, Matt. It's not about massive change in a short period of time. It's about creating new habits. And for me, creating new habits is often something really simple that you just need to repeat for an amount of time. I carried that notebook around for maybe a month or two, and then I didn't need it anymore. It would be, I'm just thinking about it now. It would have been so much better if I'd had a smartphone back then and I could just drop notes into it. But it's small changes. It's something as simple as asking your teammates to call you out on saying sorry where you shouldn't. It's little tiny changes that you embed over a period of time, and not necessarily a long period of time. I think they say that it takes about 17 days of repeated action for something to become a habit. I think if you can chip away at this, I know it feels like a mountain when you try to turn people pleasing off, but if you can chip away at it, don't let perfect get in the way of progress. Just keep on keeping on, and form those new little habits, and you'll be amazed. You won't see it at the time, but you'll be amazed 10 years later when you look back at it and go, God, I was a completely different person back then.
And on that bombshell, I think that's a beautiful place for us to be able to wrap up today's corporate therapy. I think what we're trying to say here, Rob, is that people pleasing may have come out of a survival strategy early on in your life. And it did amazing things, though, for your early career. But if you absolutely want to nail leadership, you have to look at what habits you need to be able to shift, to change, to adapt if you want to get promoted. What's your closing advice you'd like to give the team?
I think with people pleasing, it's often at the point where you become a middle manager that needs to stop. So try those little habits, see what you can make work.
So thanks for tuning in. Subscribe, share, and send this to one of your colleagues that's perhaps too nice for their own good. See you in the next one. Remember, no is a full sentence.
Stay curious, folks.